The untold story of comfort women during World War II. Ever wondered about the untold stories lingering in the shadows of World War II? Well, today, we're pulling back the curtain on a chapter that's as chilling as it is heartbreaking. The horrors endured by those labeled as comfort women. The term doesn't even begin to convey the unimaginable suffering they went through. Join us on this journey through history, not just to shed light on the past, but to pay tribute to the survivors, salute their resilience, and ensure the world never forgets the atrocities they faced. Before we delve deeper into the heart-wrenching tale of the comfort women, let's rewind the clock to a tumultuous era that shaped the course of history, World War II. The war, which spanned from 1939 to 1945, was a global conflict involving nations from nearly every corner of the world. On one side, the Allies, including the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and others, fought against the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now let's zoom into the Pacific arena. Japan, hungry for empire expansion, goes full throttle with aggressive military campaigns, leaving a trail of destruction. But here's the kicker: the brutality of war wasn't confined to the battlefield. Civilians, especially women, unwittingly found themselves caught in the crossfire, becoming victims of some seriously messed up systemic abuse. As Japan occupied territories throughout Asia, the Imperial Japanese Army sought to satisfy its soldiers in a disturbingly calculated way. They implemented a system that carried out unspeakable crimes against women, a system known as the Comfort Women System. They set up what they conveniently called comfort stations. In reality, these were nothing more than glorified brothels, where the dignity of thousands got tossed aside like yesterday's news. Let's break down the grim reality of comfort stations. Comfort stations started popping up like a dark cloud across the map. It all kicked off in Shanghai back in 1932, and from there, they spread like wildfire. Japan, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaya, Thailand, Burma, East New Guinea, Hong Kong, Macau, French Indochina, you name it. Wherever Japanese troops went, these stations followed. Now, what happened inside those walls is downright horrifying. The conditions were beyond deplorable. Think overcrowded, unsanitary, and a complete absence of anything resembling compassion. These were the places where the victims of this system, these poor women, faced unimaginable suffering. It's a chapter of history that's as heartbreaking as it is infuriating. In the beginning, the comfort stations were mainly filled with Japanese prostitutes who signed up voluntarily. But as the Japanese army extended its reach in the late 1930s, things got sinister. They shifted their gaze to the locals in occupied areas, places like Korea, Taiwan, and China. Here's where it gets dark. The military started using agents to recruit women. These agents, or let's call them what they really were, predators, would roam from city to city, rounding up 40 to 50 young girls at a time. Once they had enough victims, they'd ship them off to China and other war zones. When they set their sights on young girls, particularly those from Korea, they played the dirtiest trick in the book: lies. They spun a web of false promises, dangling the allure of jobs like factory workers, nurses, laundry pros, or kitchen helpers in Japan or other Japanese-controlled areas. And guess who got the short end of the stick? Mostly daughters from struggling peasant families who got conned into something they never signed up for. It's not just a grim situation, but a downright stomach-churning, gut-wrenching mess. And it only gets worse from here. Over time, some of the women who made it through the ordeal have bravely shared their stories, telling of kidnappings, torture, rape, and the harrowing experiences they endured. Shockingly, the Japanese government has been quite unwilling to admit these crimes, let alone consider offering any reparations. Let's hear firsthand about the harrowing experiences of those who survived this nightmarish ordeal. Meet Neum, who was just a 10-year-old kid when her world turned upside down. Kidnapped and thrown into a truck with other women, headed for a military camp in West Java. Can you imagine? At that tender age, she ended up sharing a tiny tent with 2 other girls, enduring the unthinkable as soldiers openly raped them. I was still so young, she says. Within 2 months, my body was completely destroyed. I was nothing but a toy. As a human being, I meant nothing. That's how it felt during the Japanese era. Fast forward to when she finally escaped and returned home after 2 months, only to face another nightmare. Her parents couldn't even recognize her. I didn't dare tell anyone that I had been raped. I didn't want to hurt my parents. I was afraid that no one would want me, that I would be left out. But people still abused me by calling me a Japanese hand-me-down. Because I had been gone so long, they suspected what had happened. Yang Su Lee was another girl who was taken against her will to become a comfort woman. Lee's tale unfolds against the backdrop of Taegao, Korea during the early 1940s, a time when Japanese occupation cast its shadow over the region. At the tender age of 16, Lee, along with a friend, was abruptly taken away from her home in Korea and transported to Taiwan, where a grim fate awaited them as sex slaves for the Japanese military. Lee reported that Japanese soldiers hit and kicked them during their journey, sometimes causing her to pass out. She had to serve 4 or 5 men each day. Horrifying, right? Well, it gets worse. Some victims testified that they had to serve up to 60 soldiers per day. Lee was never compensated for these services. Also, these comfort stations were basically under the strict rulebook of the Japanese military. One rule they made clear was that protection was non-negotiable. Condoms were a must. It's like they turned something horrifying into a twisted routine, showing just how calculated and controlled the whole system was. Yet, let's be real, these rules were more like on-paper fantasies, especially at the temporary comfort stations on the front lines. No strict oversight. And guess what? Condoms were as scarce as common sense at times. Soldiers weren't too keen on using them, and good luck finding medical staff when you needed them. It was a mess, with many women forced to keep working even if they had picked up sexually transmitted diseases. In some cases, the Japanese military thought it was a bright idea to give these women injections of salvarsan or arsphenamine to prevent syphilis. These injections were toxic, and the women who got injected faced serious side effects, like infertility. Plus, the fees collected at these comfort stations, they weren't going into the pockets of the women enduring this nightmare. They were lining the pockets of those running the show. And as if that weren't enough, some women who managed to save a bit of money couldn't even access it during or after the war. It's like a whole new level of messed up. Refusing to serve at these so-called comfort stations was a one-way ticket to punishment and torture for these women. Lee recalled how the girls were threatened, told that stepping beyond the station's boundaries meant facing death. Fear-stricken and clueless about her location, escape wasn't even a thought for her. Another survivor, Ok Sun Yi, emphasized the intense surveillance at the comfort station. She dared to make a break for it once, but was swiftly caught by Japanese soldiers, enduring stab wounds that left permanent scars. According to her, and echoed by other survivors, many women faced assault, torture, and even death at these stations. Yi bluntly stated, "It was not a comfort station, it was a slaughterhouse." This stark reality paints a brutal contrast to the dictionary's idea of comfort. The accusations are backed by chilling stories, such as in Hainan Island, China, where comfort women deemed too sick to work were killed rather than given medical treatment. The survivors testified that they were either barred from going out or permitted to do so under intense surveillance. Even if they got the chance to escape, unfamiliarity with local languages and geography made it practically impossible. Those brave enough to try were publicly tortured and killed as a gruesome warning to others. To add to the horror, when comfort women passed away, they weren't granted a proper burial. Instead, they were left abandoned in the streets. Hunger and constant abuse were the grim daily companions of these women. Lee shared the gut-wrenching reality of losing her Korean identity in that hellish comfort station. They slapped Japanese names on these women and enforced a strict no Korean rule, beating anyone who dared to speak their native language. It wasn't just about cultural erasure. It was a twisted tactic to keep them from plotting escapes. Survivors tell tales of being deliberately kept apart during transit, ensuring no chance to whisper plans. At the comfort station, soldiers played language police, making sure the women couldn't huddle and talk, fearing any hint of rebellion. Now, for the women on the front lines, their struggles mirrored those of Japanese soldiers. During air raids, they'd all scramble to find cover in mountains or caves. Once the bombing chaos settled, soldiers hastily set up makeshift tents, making these women serve them. The threats weren't just from abuse. Bombings and sinking ships claimed many lives. After the war, some weren't spared by retreating Japanese soldiers, left to die or abandoned. Fortunately, a few were rescued or caught as prisoners of war by the Allied forces, finding their way back home. Lee was one of them. Can you imagine her mom's reaction? She thought Lee was a ghost and passed out. As we wrap up this journey through a dark chapter of history, it's important to take a moment and reflect. The stories of these brave women aren't just tales from the past. They're powerful reminders of resilience in the face of unimaginable horrors. So, what's our role in all this? It's about ensuring these stories aren't swept under the rug. Share this, talk about it, and keep the conversation alive. Because in remembering, we honor not just the pain they endured, but also the strength they showed in the midst of it all. If you found this exploration thought-provoking and want to join us in uncovering more hidden corners of history, don't forget to subscribe to History Spotlight on YouTube. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and let history be our guide.